Hello, 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 everyone. Happy Tuesday. I am so excited to have today's guest. I've wanted to have him on the channel for a little while, and we finally worked it out. His name is Christopher Rufo. He's a filmmaker, writer, policy researcher. He's directed 4 films for PBS, including his latest, America Lost, that tells the story of 3 forgotten American cities. He's also a research fellow at the Discovery Institute Center on Wealth, Poverty, and Morality, and a contributing editor at City Journal. And how he came on my radar is Chris has been sending lots of tweets outlining the anti-racist training going on in the city of Seattle and the federal government. And I have to tell you, I was so excited that you did, because I sent out a tweet probably a couple months ago of an email that a City of Seattle employee had sent me, basically showing that the City of Seattle is segregating its training, and white people have one training and people of color had another. And I was really hoping that someone like you, Chris, would pick that up and actually go and do journalism. And you did. Congratulations. You're a real journalist.
Yeah.
So welcome.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Well, let's just start in. So how did you become interested? I think you started right with the City of Seattle's training that they were doing with their employees. How did this issue kind of get on your radar, and what did you do with it?
Yeah, I kind of stumbled into it backwards, almost by accident. But, I've been looking primarily at kind of human policy issues. So issues of homelessness, addiction, mental illness, crime, and policing. And increasingly, all of those domains, all of those policy areas have been really kind of dominated from the inside out by critical race theory and kind of social justice concepts and terminology and trainings. And Seattle is one of the cities that is kind of like the epicenter of a lot of this stuff. You have some of the first kind of race and social justice curriculums. You have a very kind of activist educator class. As well as it's the home of people like Robin DiAngelo of the white fragility infamy. So Seattle kind of, I think, is a really kind of a bellwether for this stuff. And it really is something that I kept seeing over and over and over in all of my other policy areas. And then starting just a few weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago now, I started getting leaked documents from within the city of Seattle and then across the federal government, outlining these absolutely horrific training sessions that play into kind of race essentialism, the idea that people can be reduced to some essential quality based on their racial background, ideas that were explicitly endorsing neo-segregationism, so saying you must separate people on the basis of race because they have different aptitudes and capabilities and perspectives that must be addressed separately. And then this kind of critical race euphoria, this idea that everything is really about race, nothing else matters except for only these kind of newfound and newly kind of revived racial theories. That's really at the center of all of our public policy. So I think it's really inescapable. If you are a journalist covering policy or a kind of working at a think tank, you have to engage with these because it is absolutely pervasive. It's everywhere. And in my view, it's wrong-headed and dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you first started getting access to the documents from City of Seattle, what were your first thoughts upon reading them?
Shock, disbelief. I mean, this is absolutely insane. I mean, you couldn't think of, it's almost like someone is trolling them and coming up with a kind of a stereotype or almost a parody. If you said, imagine you are a social justice warrior designing a racial justice curriculum as a parody, what actually exists in real life is almost indistinguishable from that. And it's absolutely unbelievable because you get a sense that these are folks who are, kind of mid-level bureaucrats in a government agency that are, adapting academic theories, trying to translate that into a kind of bureaucratic process, and then passing it down again to a kind of staffer who is administering these trainings. And you get really like kind of third-rate sociology transcribed by third-rate bureaucrats, administered in third-rate government departments. And what really emerges as the end product is embarrassing. It's shameful. It bears so little resemblance to something that could actually help people, unite people, bring people from different backgrounds together to a common purpose. that all I had to do was really put it out there. And, you get probably 50 million impressions on Twitter about this stuff just because it is so outrageous. It's so nakedly bankrupt of any kind of intellectual authority. And it's really divisive and destructive in a way that I don't think we've seen before.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think, for me as an organizational psychologist, hearing that reaction, honestly, like, thank you for that, because I feel like I've been in crazy town for the last year with this stuff kind of becoming more and more and more popular. And in the HR space, it didn't really start gaining traction until the Black Lives Matter stuff, Black Lives Matter's protests started rising. And then all of a sudden it exploded everywhere. And it was the only thing that organizations were investing in was this anti-racist training for their teams. Now, I've been well, let's just say a little pissed at this development, because for me, like, I've spent my whole career working with teams to help build more collaborative teams, more cohesive teams. And I look at some of the materials that you found and I say, this is a recipe for interpersonal nonsense, for really piss poor team relations, because everything gets boiled down to the color of someone's skin. And they're using that as a mechanism to explain every single behavior pattern when it usually has nothing to do with race when we actually look at it on a psychological level. So, I mean, were you surprised at the response that your tweets about these things got? Because they were pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, I really was. I got the first kind of trove of documents and I said, oh, I'm kind of tired. I don't want to turn this into an article for City Journal. I got a bunch of other stuff. So I'll just kind of tweet it out and just throw up a quick thread about it. And then it's like, boom, just explodes everywhere. It's on the front page of foxnews.com. I'm getting, TV and radio interviews everywhere. And I think I was really surprised. Honestly, a lot of the stuff that you find that's the best is you kind of back into it by accident. It blows up by surprise. And then you realize you want to kind of like ride that wave and see where it goes, kind of follow your intuition and your opportunities and what people are responding to. So I was surprised. And I guess it's because of this. It's, having lived in Seattle, lived in Berkeley, California, and Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., for me, it's almost like this is the air you breathe. So for me, it wasn't really that surprising in some regards. I think it was particularly egregious, but it's really kind of standard progressive academic theory, social justice ideology that's translated into kind of HR documents. And I guess because I'm so immersed in it on a daily basis, just by virtue of where I live and what I study, I was surprised at the reaction. But then kind of the shock of recognition was that, oh yeah, this stuff is so pervasive that it almost desensitizes you. It almost habituates you. It almost makes you feel like because it is a lie told often enough that it becomes kind of the truth in a really kind of Orwellian manner. It was almost a shock of recognition. Like, wait a minute, yeah, this actually stuff, it is bad, it is wrong, it is crazy. But I think we've been just hammered in the last 5 years by so much media that repeats the slogans: white fragility, white supremacy, blackness, whiteness, all of the kind of slogans that have really been repeated so much in the discourse, starting at the elite institutions like the New York Times, and then working their way down to kind of small town bureaucracies. You become numbed to it. And I think that's really, for the large extent, the success. I think it's very difficult to argue on the merits that this stuff is even intellectually coherent or valuable. But just by virtue of the dominant position of the ideologues in media and in public institutions, they've been able to establish this as a truth. And I think that it's up to people like us, let's say, to actually challenge it on substantive grounds and expose it to a wider audience that can make a judgment that I think is a better reflection of common sense.
Yeah, I mean, I really think based on the executives that I've spoken to throughout the past several months, most of them have no idea what's in this training when they invest to bring it into an organization. They get told by their HR person, this is something we should do, and they say, okay, go do your thing, HR people. I'm not really going to worry about it too much. But very few of them, I think, have any idea what is actually in this training and what their employees are actually going to be asked to do.
Yeah.
So enlighten us. What are some of the things that people have to do? And we're focusing in, I just want to put a really fine point on this, on government organizations, which means that taxpayer dollars are going to fund this crazy town training. So what are some of the things people have to do in this training?
Yeah, so the Seattle training is quite interesting. So they first of all segregated it on the basis of race. They said these are a training for white employees, and the title of the training was Interrupting Internalized Racial Superiority and Whiteness. So it's all predicated on this idea that City of Seattle white employees can be reduced to the quality of whiteness that is kind of inherent in their being. And it's an obligation upon those employees to interrupt their whiteness, essentially to understand the kind of core flaw that exists within themselves, understand that they have, by virtue of birth, internalized a system of white supremacy. And this training is essentially trying to locate that kind of inner evil and then trying to expose it and interrupt it and convert those employees to the work of anti-racism. So that's like on the first page of the training. That's basically what's communicated. And, you know, it started out pretty simply, according to some folks who have gone through the training. You're supposed to essentially stand up. You're saying, you know, my name is Karen, I'm white, or my name is Johnny, I'm white. My pronouns are he and him. And you know, I'm really looking forward to this because I really want to understand how my whiteness actively harms other people. So you're expected to kind of confess your sins really at the outset, to kind of embrace the racial identity and racial categorization that they've established. And then it takes you through a series of kind of thought exercises where you're supposed to kind of imagine yourself as a white person and understand how all of the kind of values and habits and associations that you have internally are really vestiges of white supremacy. So things like objectivity is a white supremacist value. Individualization is a white supremacist value. Comfort and the need for comfort is really just white supremacy is expressing itself. And then intellectualization is also a kind of value of whiteness, and so on and so on. So you're supposed to break down all of those, I think, are really like Enlightenment values. And you're supposed to basically say those are Enlightenment values that are actually an illusion. They're cover for oppression. Then you have to kind of outline how you personally have harmed people of color, how you've harmed other people at work, which is kind of the bargain that they make, where it's like cult programming, where you say you have to admit to a specific transgression, and now we retain that and we can use it against you unless you kind of cooperate with this ongoing program. And then you have to study the kind of principles of anti-racism. So basically saying if everyone is racist, every white person is racist. So in order to kind of rectify this, you must sign up for this political program. And then they actually have people really kind of pledge loyalty to this new ideological program of kind of quote unquote anti-racism. And it's degrading, it's humiliating, it plays into like horrible racial stereotypes. It's really no better than the kind of racial stereotyping and essentialism and pseudoscience of the 1920s. It uses some of those same tropes, but then tries to essentially flip the power hierarchy. So it really is, in the words of a great colleague, James Lindsay, cult programming. I mean, there's really no other way to think about it except for kind of induction in a cult, exploitation of psychological vulnerabilities, and then kind of recruitment into this never-ending campaign of kind of waves of guilt, followed by waves of kind of ideologically supported action.
Absolutely. And Christine sent in the perfect super chats. She says, 2 more wine to numb the pain from all the stupid. Thank you, Christine. I will use that super chat well. And I just want to say, folks, Chris only has an hour to be with us today. So if you have a question for him, make sure you get it in early, and I will do my best to make sure all the questions are answered. So, Chris, another aspect of white supremacy at work that you left out is schedules and being on time. And so, by virtue of being on time for our live chat today, you are a white supremacist. So,
yeah, I mean, it really is crazy. I think that on time is the same thing as, math. The whole debate that's been happening about does 2 + 2 = 4 or 5, is being on time just racism? I mean, it really, I think the deeper goal of this, and I don't think this is the conscious goal of the people who are administering these trainings, but the kind of theoretical goal that underpins all of this stuff is that they really want to essentially smash anything that is associated with tradition, anything that is associated with the Enlightenment, anything that is associated with kind of productive corporate capitalist behavior. So, being on time is a kind of, in their discourse, would be a kind of a vestige of the white Protestant work ethic that is really dehumanizes other traditions where that have a different kind of cultural conception of time. But the problem is really simple, right? It's like, well, if no one has to be on time, if you're running an engineering firm and you can't agree that 2 + 2 = 4, and any kind of individual merit or effort is really something that shouldn't be rewarded, how do you build or create anything? I mean, how do you, and in government, it's particularly important because if the city of Seattle, for example, has to deliver electricity, deliver clean water, keep the roads paved, you really want a workforce that shows up on time, works hard, and subscribes to basic kind of conceptions of math and engineering. But there's this two-step dance where, on the one hand, everyone knows that. And if you're building a road or managing the water supply for the city of Seattle, you're going to do that anyways. But on the other hand, you have this kind of abstract ideological force that is trying to basically question and disrupt and destroy all of those assumptions. So I don't know. I'm kind of torn between being horrified and thinking that this is something that is deeply destructive and has the potential to be I don't want to say problematic, very create negative consequences for society. And then the other part of me is saying, this stuff is so ridiculous that it's going to be a kind of passing fad or a panic. But I think people will come to their senses. And I don't know, I oscillate on a daily basis. I'm not sure which one is more kind of consonant with the truth.
Well, I think for me, the biggest way that this is going to hurt organizations is that it's going to completely destroy team psychological safety. Now, there is about a mountain of research to back up that psychological safety among your working groups, your teams and organizations, it is the number one thing that leads to overall success for the organization. So the most famous example of this is Google did like a 2-year study of all the teams working at Google. And of course, there are no like underperforming teams there, one would argue. But what they found is that the high-performing teams, the thing that set them apart from every other team was their ability to trust one another, to communicate openly, to have each other's back, to be able to engage in productive conflict. And when you have trainings like this that are coming in with the very specific intention of disrupting team camaraderie, that's what the intention is. You're going and you're confessing all your sins against your coworkers, things you may, and they frankly may have not thought about in years or didn't even take it as an offense. And now all of a sudden you're accused of microaggressions every day. It's going to destroy team camaraderie and thus destroy productivity for the organization. And I almost wonder if that's part of the insidious nature of it. Is like, this is their direct attack on capitalism, is to destroy the structures that are benefiting from capitalism. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's the exact kind of practical outcome of this stuff, right? And I think another organization, I've been thinking about this a little bit and talking to some friends of mine, including a friend of mine who is a former Army Ranger. I said, the military, right? The American military is one of the biggest organizations in the country. It is very much racially diverse, geographically diverse. And I think you can make an argument that it was actually one of the institutions that was able to integrate people from different backgrounds very successfully, maybe more successfully than anywhere else. Especially in times where there's a draft. So there's kind of no selection bias in the process, more or less. And the military culture, from what I understand talking to folks, is that you want to basically get to know the individual that's standing next to you. And if there are bullets flying towards you, you rely on that person to survive. You develop a bond that is very close and very tight. And the issues of kind of race or class or geography, you might joke about it. It might be kind of part of conversation. But when it comes down to it, you are united in a single mission. And the trust actually has to go up very high because you literally, your life depends on this other person. And I think that's a kind of counter model where you have something that takes a totally different tack, where they're saying we want to kind of move beyond issues of identity and move towards issues of kind of universal camaraderie and brotherhood that brings people together in a common pursuit. Maybe the same kind of thing that's happening at Google. A lot of these tech companies, I'm in Seattle, I have a lot of kind of exposure. They're very diverse, people from all over the world. You have a Russian guy and a Pakistani guy and an American guy and a dude from Alabama and a guy from, Shanghai, China. And they're all trying to kind of come together to build these extraordinary products. And I think that you're right in the sense that this stuff can do a lot to undermine team trust, undermine team camaraderie. And it almost is baffling that these companies are adopting this stuff. And I think I've kind of asked why. Why would a company that really knows better, right? The people at Google and Amazon and Facebook and Microsoft, these people know this stuff's garbage. I've talked to these folks at very high levels and they say, oh, we got to do these, this diversity training or this implicit bias testing. It's complete garbage, but I can't say so publicly. Right. And I could never disagree in our internal communication. So I think there's a certain amount of kind of social kind of pressure, social shaming. And then there's the calculation on the behalf of the corporation where, well, we probably won't lose much if we do it. But if we don't do it, there's a potential to be really blown up in the media, blown up in the press, blown up by activists. So I think the solution is really to try to turn the equation a bit differently and try to create a new set of incentives so that people can say, this is bullshit. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to make my employees do the two-fingered clickety-click implicit bias test that is like so kind of, it almost feels like a really bad kind of tool designed by elementary school students. I don't know. Have you taken the implicit bias test?
Oh, I did. And it showed me I had no implicit bias, which I then saved to get out of doing any of this trading.
Yeah. But it's like this, like, A, is it internally consistent? I don't know. My sense is it's not internally consistent. And then B, how do you make the leap from clickety clack? I think it's E and I. You click E and I based on pictures and words you see. How do you then make the leap? Does that kind of very limited cognitive test then kind of, can it replicate? Can it be generalized? And then how does it apply to actual human behavior in real life? I mean, I think that the answer is it probably doesn't at all. And and the latest research that I've seen, again, this is not my domain of study. You probably know better than I do, but is that the kind of the short-term and medium-term impact of these things is actually trends negative in a lot of ways. So I really feel like, people are kind of donning the cloak of science, but I think over time this stuff will be reassessed as nothing more than pseudoscience and ideology masquerading as social science.
Well, I hope so too. And, I've done a lot of research on white fragility and I forced myself to read the book and I'm now going through the exercise of, I descended into madness in the reading of this book. But now I'm going through and looking at all the sources and really trying to wrap my head around how she put this together because I want to fight it. I want to come at it very aggressively. There are 2 chapters in the book where the woman literally uses 0 sources. It's just all anecdotal evidence from her own experience. And I mean, the sourcing in the rest of the book is pretty sparse. And I think, there's got to be a point where people wake up and they acknowledge that there is actually no foundational research in psychology or in industrial organizational psychology that I know of that backs this stuff up. And I keep begging for people on Twitter, like, if you have evidence that this stuff works, send it to me. I will do a mea culpa very, very quickly if you can show me that this actually adds up to something material. But I haven't seen that evidence yet, and it doesn't sound like you have either.
Yeah, I haven't, and I tweeted out recently. I saw a kind of headline. I didn't dig into all the notes and the appendices, but I saw the headline. There was a Harvard sociologist who had studied 800 organizations, diversity trainings over the course of 30 years. So this is someone for whom the incentives are probably to think that this is good, kind of the social incentives on campus. He'd studied it for 30 years across 800 companies, and he found that organizations are much better off doing nothing than holding diversity trainings. So, I mean, again, it's one study. I think it's a huge kind of sample size and maybe generalizable, but I think if anything, it really just, casts doubt that this stuff is valuable in any way. And from what I've heard from people who have kind of reported to me on their experience, it's really toxic. And it's not hard to understand why. When you're told, essentially, you are a bad person and within you is this kind of unchangeable evil based on your circumstances at birth, that person is probably not going to like that. It's probably not a very good way to build a kind of camaraderie. It's probably not a good way to kind of bond that person closer to the mission and the team. In fact, it actually is highly alienating. But I think, again, I really don't think that the goal here is to increase organizational capacity or productivity, right? I mean, that's what they say. But I think the real goal is an ideological and political goal. And it's a way where people can essentially kind of purge ideological opponents from the workplace and then have the organization of whatever kind of public or private stripe that it is work towards political and ideological goals. And I think that's the end game. And I just don't see how you read it in any kind of different conclusion.
No, I totally agree. And I've actually been working on a project on this channel. Do you know the white supremacist organization document that they're using? It's like 6 pages long and lists all the grievances of white supremacy culture at work. Things like we already talked about. Oh, yeah. So what I'm doing on my channel right now is I'm taking it section by section and I'm actually breaking it down and debunking it. But you know what it is? It's all based on work style. It's all, if you use, like, I use the DISC psychological model when it comes to work style, but if you use that model, you can see very clearly that all of the grievances they have are related to communication style or someone's approach to work. And it's very, very clear when you break it down. And there is absolutely no evidence that assessment or your work style has anything to do with your race or any immutable characteristic that people have. But it sounds sexy. I don't know.
I think too, it's like my real beef with this is that, I mean, I'm a political conservative, right? I'm happy to put that out there. That's where I'm coming from, and it should be clear to everyone. But I mean, even kind of from my political orientation, you have to admit that white supremacy was a foundational problem in the United States. I mean, white supremacy is a true evil. And it's something that is a horrific historical circumstance and ideology. And it's something that animated the worst kind of movements of the 20th century. But at the same time, I think it really trivializes it when you say that showing up for work on time is white supremacy. It's like, what? That's ridiculous. And I think the real unintended harm is not that I think we can all agree. I think almost everyone agrees that, white supremacy is wrong. But what happens when you trivialize it and then you find it kind of subconsciously or implicitly in everything, it really kind of numbs the mind to the true evil of white supremacy and then makes it so that it almost trivializes that historical experience itself. And I think that's really the shame. I think it actually works counter to the kind of progressive goals of the traditional progressive goals of moving towards greater equality. I found in these documents that the kind of the core goal isn't really equality. The core goal is a new hierarchy based on the kind of identity progressive kind of pyramid that they've established. And it just seems like something that is wrong. And I think that they're using the kind of fear that's associated and the connotations that are associated when you say this is white supremacy or this person is a white supremacist as a kind of cudgel against, kind of good thinking people so that they are fearful of opposing their political ideology. And, I'm glad to see you talking about it. And I try to be, very careful with my words, but also try to be honest about this stuff and tackle it head on. Because I think it's a shame. I think it goes against our best instincts, and I think it will turn our society in a direction that is really ugly and unnecessary.
No, I completely agree. And I think that it's important for everyone that's in a position to speak up about this, that we do, because so many people can't. So many people are afraid of, even if they push back on participating in this training, that they'll lose their job. I mean, there's one major organization, and I think I know who it was, but I don't want to misquote myself live on the internet. But they actually recently had the training like this virtually for all their employees, and about 300 people spoke up, and many of them got fired for speaking up as a result of this training. And it's actually insane. So we had a super chat question, and I want to make sure I get to it. So sorry, guys. It's kind of like the super chats fly all over the place in this chat, but I want to say it was something to the effect, oh, here it is. How is this legal? How can I avoid being forced to participate on racist training? I mean, do you think this training is legal from your perspective, Chris?
I don't know. I'm not an attorney, but I have I've read a lot of legal documents in my time, and I did a basic look. There's two places where I think this could be illegal. One is the Hatch Act, which bars government employees from essentially relaying political messages or engaging in political activity on the job. But the problem with that is that it's really focused on partisan activity. So you can't say on your work email server, Joe Biden is awesome, vote for Joe Biden. That's prohibited. But they've ruled, the kind of administrators have ruled that if you say Black Lives Matter, that's political, but it's not partisan activity. So it's allowed under the Hatch Act. So probably not there. There is the Civil Rights Act, though. And I think that there's a possibility. Again, I've been reaching out to kind of legal scholars, some of whom don't want to touch this because it's quite risky. But I've been reaching out to folks to get a better understanding of the Civil Rights Act that prevents kind of race-based discrimination, that prevents unequal treatment on the basis of those protected categories, including race. So I think there's probably a good argument there. I think that's probably the strongest place. And I mean, it's going to take, though, is it's going to take a person that is employed, that's willing to risk kind of the kind of condemnation of their colleagues and the backlash and kind of intimidation and retaliation to actually file a lawsuit and go through the courts. But what I think I'm going to do in the near term, that is kind of a fun project, is I'm going to file a civil rights complaint against the Office of Civil Rights for the city of Seattle and see where that goes. Try to have them answer some hard questions. Try to see their justification for race-based segregation. Try to see their justification for race essentialism, and try to see their justification for a number of the kind of programs and practices that they've put in place. That might be something that could spark another moment of scrutiny and attention. And then I'm working with a number of my whistleblowers to actually file official complaints with the Office of the Special Counsel and other federal agencies. So that's going to be also something that's going to get deployed in the coming weeks. So, I found that, I'm in a great position where I can do journalism, but I also, as a kind of a think tanker, I have a bit more latitude where I can actually put some of this stuff into action. So it'll be a kind of a fun project in the coming months to try to take action on some of this stuff and try to say, how do you justify this? How is this legal? How does this violate your own civil rights policies? And at the very least, put these people in an uncomfortable position and let them know that they're being watched, that they're being monitored, that someone is going to hold them accountable. Because again, I heard hundreds and hundreds of people say, I want to speak out, but I'm scared. I'm scared I'm going to lose my job. I'm scared I'm going to get my, vandalized. I'm scared that I'm going to be a pariah at work. I'm scared that the Office of Inclusion is going to, ruin my career. And I really feel like it's kind of a responsibility that I have to speak out on behalf of those people.
Well, we definitely appreciate that. And guys, make sure you're following Chris on Twitter. That's where you usually put this stuff, right? Is Twitter right now?
Yeah, Twitter is kind of the first line. And then if it takes off and I have some time, I'll format it into an article for City Journal or the New York Post.
Awesome. Well, I put his Twitter information in the description below. Also, there is a link to support Chris's work on his website, and I hope you do, because this is really important. We need someone in there that's doing this work, because God knows I'm not going to do it because I'm not a real journalist. All right, Chris, we have a question. How do you stand staying in Seattle as they are going crazy? I think this is a really good question.
Oh man, it is absolutely going bonkers. I feel like I had some hope that it was going to turn around. I thought that everything was going to get better. You know, my initial research focus was really on homelessness, addiction, and mental illness. So up until a few months ago, that seemed to be the most important public policy issue in Seattle and San Francisco and LA. It was really, I think, kind of causing tremendous chaos in these cities. Dramatically reducing the quality of life, making, residential neighborhoods places that were, more dangerous, kind of more chaotic, more disordered and disorganized. And then in the last few months, since the COVID lockdowns and then the civil unrest, and now the defund the police movement that's captured steam, and all of the kind of rioting and looting, it now seems like perhaps I was naive to think that things were going to get better and that these were the worst problems the city could have. So it's very difficult. I mean, it's something that is very difficult to see a city essentially implode at the kind of explicit direction of political leaders and with the support of the majority of voters, which just absolutely boggles my mind. But, I think I've kind of come to a more stoic place about it. It's a fascinating social experiment. When you kind of enable and ennoble the mob, when you destroy the police department, when you shut down the county's largest jail, and when you try to effectively gut the court system, what happens? This is a social experiment on a scale that we haven't seen in the United States in many decades. And I have a front row seat to it, and I'm going to do my best to slow it down or reverse it. But I think it is something that is kind of, I watch with kind of fascination because it really is the ground zero for the progressive imagination gone wild and the progressive fantasies turning into political realities. And I think that many kind of interesting and maybe horrifying, but very kind of edifying and educational things will be revealed in the coming years.
Well, I think we're all very glad we have you there on the ground for us. And I think, I firmly believe everything happens for a reason and we're put in the places that we need to be. And, thank goodness we know we have at least one person in the city of Seattle. But I don't want to focus just on Seattle because you've actually gotten documents from the federal government too, right? That showed that they spent like $5 million on this training for government employees. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I've had kind of leaked documents and whistleblower complaints and criticisms from Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, NASA, the federal financial agencies, the Treasury Department, the IRS, the National Credit Union Administration, the Veterans Affairs Office, which is the second biggest bureaucracy in the United States. I mean, almost every department in the federal government. I've been leaked documents that are essentially perpetuating the same narrative. And one of the most interesting ones was from the Treasury. I mean, the Treasury is in charge of our financial system. The Treasury is in charge of how we buy and sell, how we issue currency, how we issue bonds, how we navigate financial cycles and depressions, and how we kind of manage the balance sheet of the United States. That's a very important agency, maybe the most important agency. And they have an office that was created in the 2010s, the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion, that is described to me by people there as a kind of secret police force. I mean, kind of internal intelligence agency, where they are bombarding staff every day with these kind of highly charged racial messages. They're rooting out people who have committed microaggressions against others, and they are enforcing the dogma of critical race theory at every level of the department. And they are empowered to do this. And this is their sole function, to enforce this dogma and ideology. And the documents that I've received from those folks were just equally horrifying. And the gentleman who ran the training, a guy named Howard Ross, has billed the federal government more than $5 million for diversity trainings in recent years. I mean, this guy is becoming a millionaire peddling this pseudoscientific nonsense to the government at taxpayer expense. And, he billed NASA $500,000 for a session called Power and Privilege Sexual Orientation Workshops. And it's like, okay, I mean, all right, explain. I'd love to get more details. I have a pending Freedom of Information request on that one. But I mean, what are you going to do? Are they worried about, misgendering people on the moon? I mean, how on earth does this help NASA achieve its mission of space exploration, going to the moon, going to Mars, going further than man has ever gone before? And what I realized from the folks at NASA that were complaining about this, they said, hey, look, we got into this because we love science. We treat people equally as well as we can. And we are really supposed to be united on these incredibly complex engineering challenges. But increasingly, my day is dominated by ideological fights and this kind of diversity dogma. So I think it's really destructive, and I think it's really sad. And I think that if you think about the American bureaucracy, we spend, more money than ever on NASA, just for one example. And yet the space agencies peaked in the 1960s when they had a fraction of the budget, a fraction of the technology, and a fraction of the pure scientific knowledge. And I think you can say, well, why is it that we could go to the moon, 50 years ago, but we can barely even launch a spacecraft without the help of private companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin. And I think this is part of it. I think that government has become not necessarily a place for great accomplishments, but a place for ideological conformity at the expense of those accomplishments.
Yeah, and I think this is a good time for a reminder for everyone that the guy who invented the term microaggressions, he's a faculty member, I think at Columbia. Literally, he's the only person that thinks that microaggressions are a real thing. All of the research around microaggressions that he has written has framed them as this real thing, where the research around microaggressions that he has not written have basically said these are not real things. They don't affect everyone the same way. So, but he's making bank doing these microaggression trainings all over the world, and has been for about 10 years.
I've read that guy's work. I read some of the academic papers that academic papers, right? Air quotes. Yeah, but academic. Yeah, I mean, it's like, on one hand, I'm like, man, this is like just garbage. And I can't believe that this is taken seriously and really perpetuated everywhere. But then something that I kind of thought of, a thought that crept into my mind, made me feel a lot better. I said, if you're the guy who sees a microaggression in literally everything, your life must be miserable. I mean, this is someone who I feel like could not hold a conversation for more than 60 seconds. I think his calculation was that he said, in human conversation, you can conduct, I might get it wrong, but something like up to 150 micro messages and microaggressions per minute. Like, oh so, God. I mean, you could just be, it's like, those people who kind of feel like cell phone radiation is like attacking them at all times, and they're very paranoid, and they wear kind of like mesh hats. Have you ever run into someone like that?
Yes. Yeah.
That's the equivalent of that. I mean, this is a tenured professor at Columbia, I believe, who is the kind of functional equivalent of the cell phone tower mesh hat conspiracy theorists. He's just bombarded with microaggressions all the time. And I think the only proper response is to pity him.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't even pity him, though, because he is making bank and going to organizations and doing training on these microaggressions, just like Robin DiAngelo is. And like, guys, like $5 million from the federal government. I keep telling you guys that $6,000 for one of Robin DiAngelo's trainings is a low estimate. And when we're hearing $5 million from the government, you understand why I keep saying that. We do have a question from Amber, and I want to apologize, guys. A lot of you are sending in super chats, but you're not asking questions. I have a limited amount of time with Chris, and so I'm focusing on those, but I appreciate all of the super chats very much. Do you think leftists in Seattle will learn from this come November? What do you think, Chris?
Every November, I'm an optimist, and I always say, oh, the people in Seattle will finally figure out that doubling down on these policies, is not a good way, and they'll kind of come to their senses and moderate. It hasn't happened yet. And I think, if anything, the public polling data that I've seen recently that gives me kind of shock and fear is that 53% of registered Seattle voters support cutting the police department by 50%. So a majority of voters in, I believe, the United States' most educated city support gutting the police department, which would make it the smallest police department per capita of any major American city at a time when we have rising crime, rising violence, and rising homicide rates. And it just shows you the power of ideology, the power of belief, the power of superstition. I mean, it is really, truly the case that for many people, the kind of reaction to the failures, the kind of real failures that they can see on television and see in their neighborhoods, is we just didn't go far enough and double down. So
now, didn't your police chief just resign?
She did, and that was a really sad thing. I have a lot of sources and a lot of folks I would consider friends at the police department. The chief was probably the last person who was kind of holding the line against the mob that was really trying to maintain basic law and order, who was fighting the political powers who were intent on gutting and destroying her department. I really feel like she was the last public official with honor and integrity in the city of Seattle. And it's a huge loss. The folks I've talked to in the department have said the department is in chaos. It's a total scramble. Officers are in disbelief. But again, the kind of hard left tactics were victorious. The police chief, Carmen Best, was really attacked on two fronts. She was attacked legislatively. The city council had cut her pay, I believe, 40% to publicly humiliate her, with the complete intention of humiliating her. They had taken away her SWAT team. They tried to disarm the police officers of tear gas and pepper spray. They had taken, kind of an axe to the budget yesterday. But then, on a more personal note, the political class was encouraging kind of Antifa and other hard left activists to go to her house, her private residence outside of Seattle, to terrorize her neighbors, to threaten her in her residence, and to kind of vandalize and make a statement. We know where you live, and we can come get you anytime that we want. And I think those two things put together, the kind of legislative campaign against her and the kind of activist and intimidation campaign against her, was really the final straw. I mean, this is someone who's an accomplished leader. She could be a police chief at any other equivalent city and go through much less heartache. And she served 27 years for the city of Seattle. And I think it's a huge loss. And I think that it's going to make the kind of activist momentum even more likely to come to fruition.
Now, not to put too fine a point on this, but I feel like we have to, because this is the world in which we live. She's a Black woman, right?
Yeah, she is. So, and I try not to, I've seen some people in the conservative media, my colleagues whom I like and admire, they say, oh, see, look, the Seattle City Council is hypocritical. You have I believe a majority white or kind of a substantive plurality of a white city council firing the city's first Black female police chief. But I think that's a weak argument. And I think it's a weak argument because it accepts the premises of identity politics. You're essentially accepting the premises of theoretically your kind of ideological opponents. And then once you've accepted those premises, you're really just arguing within their larger framework. I think a much better argument is to frame it like this, is to basically say, if you were surprised that the kind of predominantly white activists and city council members were pushed out a Black female police chief, you haven't been paying attention, because it's never been about diversity. It's always been about power. Kind of race is the means, but Marxism is the ends. And I think that if you fight it, rather than fighting on the grounds of the means, saying, hey, look, this is kind of racial justice hypocrisy, you really need to fight on the grounds of the ends. Say, hey, these folks will use issues of race when convenient and abandon them when they oppose their actual kind of revealed preferences for Marxism. I mean, really unalloyed Marxism. And I think you have to fight on that level. I think that's the intellectually coherent argument. I think that's the only argument that ultimately makes a substantive case. So don't get bogged down by your opponent's intellectual categories. Always make sure that you're arguing on kind of first principles, or arguing about ends and not necessarily means.
No, I think it's a fair enough point. I just like to point out their hypocrisy whenever I can.
True. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah.
It is, but they give us so many of those opportunities. All right, one more super chat. Do you believe the defund the police movement will only make way to set up a more of an AI Big Brother society?
No, it's a great question. I think two parts. I mean, on a certain part, yeah, I think there's going to be a Big Brother society emerging from this, right? But I don't think it's going to be the kind of Minority Report, highly technological surveillance style society, because the people who support defunding the police are also very much opponents of the kind of surveillance state tactics and methods. So I don't think you're going to get that. I think what's more likely to emerge is you're going to have policing by ideology. So you're going to have something that is more akin to a kind of shadow police force. You're going to have nonprofit organizations and alternative justice programs that are selected on the basis of their ideological compatibility. And then they'll be really administering a shadow justice system. They'll have shadow prisons, shadow courts, and shadow police forces that will be guided almost in a way like in the Middle East, where you see kind of in Iran, you see the Basiji militias. These are kind of the ideological street enforcers. You're really going to see something more akin to that if this is extended to its natural extension. And I think you're already seeing that in the plans. If you look at the documents outlining the plans for the City of Seattle defund movement, they really want to close the traditional jails, shut down the traditional courts, and disband the traditional police force, and replace it with what they call community programs, nonprofit programs, activist programs that are administered with no kind of public trial or accountability, really no public record keeping of any kind, but just kind of keeping them within the activist sphere, and then turning the kind of what you would think of as the criminals or the incarcerated, and turning them over to the custody of activist organizations. That's not me just saying this will what happens in 10 years. This is the plan that's on the table right now. And it's something that I think is quite scary. And I'm working on a big essay on this exact theme.
Well, what a time to be alive, right? So I just want to ask one more question. I don't want to let you off the hook until you give us a little inside info. So you sent out a tweet the other day that said, I just received leaked documents from a federal research agency that held a 3-day re-education camp for white males with their goal of undoing white male culture. And you haven't done a write-up on this yet. I just want to see if you can give us any inside intel into what you've got.
I will. So I started with a big tease. People were really enthused about it. I plan on doing it hopefully this week. I think I'll find some time to put it together. But I'll give your audience a kind of special further details on this, which I know will be very exciting for them. But, this is the largest federal nuclear research agency in the country. So these are the people that are in charge of literally our nuclear weapons, the design and implementation. And they flew out their kind of white male executives for a specific race and gender segregated retreat for 3 days. Within the documentation, you can see the immediate objections of these people. One of them said, I'm missing my 10-year-old's birthday for this. The other said, can we please be done with this by 5:30? Another one said, why is this thing so long? I don't want to be stereotyped and insulted by this training. And yet they held this training that was a basic, I resisted for many weeks to use words like brainwashing. But I think that's really an honest description of what's happening. They had them kind of tally up white male associations and attributes. They had a kind of a board that they were scribbling, kind of handwritten associations. What does it mean to be a white male? What are the associations you find with white male culture? They wrote KKK on there. They wrote white supremacy. They wrote all sorts of other things as the kind of brainstorming session. And then they had these men, and it really is kind of sad. Honestly, my heart kind of broke for these guys. By the end of it, they had to write down their white privilege affirmations, their statements of white privilege. And then they were required to fill out forms that said, what did you learn about your white male culture? What can you do to kind of interrupt your white male culture? And what can you do to be a better ally to people of color? And this is a unbelievable 3 days. I mean, I think that if you looked at kind of interrogation techniques and brainwashing techniques, there might be some good parallels. I'm curious. I don't know. I think about sometimes reading some of the CIA interrogation handbooks that have been declassified and see if there's any interesting conceptual frames that we can apply to this, because it's really just degrading. It's demoralizing. You're kind of, your heart goes out to these old white dudes. It's just like, these guys are nuclear researchers. They're doing the best job they can. They're making bombs and missiles that are safe, that keep America protected. When they signed up for the agency, maybe 20, 30 years ago, they never thought they would come to this. But they've been really, I think, frankly, humiliated at these kind of things. And I reached out for comment to some of the people who were involved. The public affairs officer for the agency called my research assistant in a panic. I think they're realizing that holding a session for white males about, quote, white male culture is probably a bad idea. And I'm hoping that they get a little heat in the coming days after I put the story out.
Well, good. I can't wait to hear or read it, because it's that's insanity. 3 days among this. Not like any of us would lose. I lost my mind after 4 hours of reading White Fragility. Like, I cannot even imagine this. Oh my God. Well, and it does make me feel sad for these guys too. You're right. I was almost like, as you were describing it, I started to get sad and depressed that they have to go for 3 days and do this. These are experienced professionals that I'm sure just like, who expects to get flown off to this for your corporate retreat, right?
Oh, garbage. Yeah. I mean, it used to be, the great retreat, it's like, go to Cancun, have a session for 2 hours, and then, drink at the beach,
Right.
That's the corporate retreat that we really need, none of this.
Ironically, it is. I actually used to tell teams all the time. I was like, just go out and have a beer together. That'll solve like go out, get drunk. Just like let your guard down. That will solve actually a lot of your problems when it comes to like interpersonal nonsense in the office. Man. Well, Chris, we have reached the top of our hour, and I know I could go on for days, but I really appreciate you giving us this time, and I appreciate your work in this area, and I'm sure we'll be keeping in touch, and I'll be paying close attention to what you come out with. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch or see more of your work?
Yeah, I think the best spot to start out is at realchrisrufo.com, or at realchrisrufo is the Twitter handle, rather. Or you can see my website with my articles at christopherrufo.com. So follow me on Twitter, tweet to me, message me. If you have anything interesting that you want to share, I'm all ears. My message box is open. And I'd love to hear from folks that have an interest in this. And who knows, maybe there are some potential whistleblowers or leakers that are watching right now. And if so, shoot me stuff. I can keep you anonymous, and I can expose what's happening at your workplace.
Cool. And they're telling you to get on Parler too in the chat.
I'm on Parler at Real Chris Rufo. I haven't used it yet, but I have a placeholder handle. So when I do use it, I'm there too.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for coming today. I hope you enjoyed the chat. If you liked it, please make sure you subscribe, give it a thumbs up, all that good stuff. And also Chris's info is in the description below, so you'll be able to find him easily. I do have another live stream coming up today at 9:30 p.m. with Joshua, my regular Tuesday night live stream. And we are going to be talking about the walkaway rally in Los Angeles, because we were both there for it and saw there were way more people than the media was reporting, because they're all liars. Except for Chris. Chris is a good one. All right. All right, everyone. Well, I'll catch you later. Have a good day.
See ya.